We're doing the top 10 teachings on Brachot 52. So, welcome. It's a very exciting page of Talmud, and I'm really excited that we're going to be studying this together. So, the Talmud on 52 is a continuation of 51b, and what happens in 51a or 51b that's relevant for us is the following thing. The Gemara says that there's a brisa that says, after this debate between Hillel and Shammai, "V'halacha k'divrei beis Hillel." The law is like Hillel. And the Gemara says, isn't that obvious? Because there was a heavenly voice that had already gone out and declared that the law is like Beis Hillel. So why does the brisa have to? We know that it's obvious. So the Gemara says it's possible that brisa was a very early brisa, before the heavenly voice went out, or alternatively, you could say it was after the Baskal, and now is when we turn to Ardaf, Nun Beis Amud Aleph. And it's going according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua. So this is top 10 teachings. This is the first one. Rabbi Yeshua, he de Amar ein mashgichim bebaskal. It's going according to the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, who says that we pay no attention to a heavenly voice. Now, let's talk a little bit about the story of Rabbi Yeshua. It's in Baba Metzia, and it is the famous incident of the Taner Shel Achnai. Achnai just means a snake, a serpent. It's a particular type of oven that had a specific question about how to, having to do with ritual purity, Tumah and Tahara. And Rabbi Eliezer held one opinion, and Rabbi Yeshua and the sages, together with Rabbi Yeshua, held the opposite opinion. And what happened is that Rabbi Eliezer started calling on miracles to happen to prove that his opinion was correct. And many things happened. It's worthwhile to look in that section. The river went the other direction. The wall of the place that we're studying started caving in, and only Rabbi Yoshua, with his power, his miraculous ability, was able to stop the wall from falling in completely. And out of respect for Rabbi Eliezer, the wall continued to lean in. And as respect for Rabbi Yeshua, it stopped, mid-lean. So finally, this is like this almost like a Harry Potter-like thing, except the magic wasn't magic, it was miraculous, until finally Rabbi Eliezer invokes that God himself should settle the debate, and a heavenly voice. The word for the heavenly voice is called a baskal, which means the daughter of a voice, which means it's a grade down from what we would call nevuah, prophecy. The echo means it's somewhat muted in the quality of this kind of divine announcement. The baskal says the law is like Rabbi Eliezer everywhere. And wow, that's seems to be he's got God on his side, and Rabbi Yeshua is unimpressed, and he says, Ein mashkichin bebaskal. We don't listen to a baskal. Now, there's two ways to read that story. One way of reading it, as the way we're reading it right now, is that Yeshua makes a blanket statement. We just pay no attention to these heavenly voices when it comes to any halachic matters. The halacha is, as the Torah itself says, Hashemayim shemayim laHashem v'ha'aretz nasan lebnei adam. Heaven is given over to God, and earth is given over to humanity, which, as we say, Torah lo b'shamayim, Torah is not in heaven. Lemar mi alelanu hashamayim v'vikachena. For us to have to say, who's going to have to go up to heaven and take it for us, or over the ocean? But it's so it's close to us. It's attainable. It's in our reach. Which also now is not just being meant to say that the Torah is not in heaven, is in earth, is that we almost disregard heaven, because the halacha has to be a process that can be argued and thought out. And if every time we get close to following the halacha, somebody says, wait, I have a heavenly voice that can prove my way, don't listen to the majority or whatever it is, don't listen to the halachic process, that's not what Judaism is. Okay. So there's one very simple way to understand this is Judaism had to be protected from other religions and from itself, both. Now, how did it have to be protected from other religions? What was the other dominant religion in the time of Rabbi Yeshua? Was the emerging Christianity. So what was the claim of the Christians? The claim was that Jesus was a prophet, even leaving aside their bigger claim, which was more problematic to Judaism, about the idea of God having a son, even leaving that aside. Just the idea that he was a prophet, and at a certain point, his prophecies were understood to be that there is a new scripture that will supersede the old scripture. So how do we know not to listen to somebody claiming to be a prophet? Maybe he made miracles, maybe he didn't. But let's say he did do, for argument's sake, let's say he performed miracles. So why wouldn't Judaism listen to what he had to say, even if it meant changing the laws of the Torah, or changing what became eventually called the Old Testament for the New Testament? The answer is very simple. The Torah tells us very clearly that if a prophet comes and says, and even if he makes miracles, you don't have to say he didn't make it. He made miracles. It doesn't matter. If he tells you to do things that supersede the Torah, that's saying that he knows another way which is not in the Torah, do not listen to that person. Now, that means, in a sense, that in a more subtle way, even if one rabbi says, I know that there is a debate about something, and it's being discussed and decided, but I think that you don't have a need to discuss and debate because I have a prophecy that the opinion that I have is the true opinion. That also is, it's not exactly a new religion, but it's in a subtle way undermining, that's the other threat. Internally, having somebody just say, I had a vision last night and God told me that I'm right. Or even a mass kind of experience in which everyone hears some voice that says the law is always like Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yeshua says we can't trust these voices because Torah lo bashamayim. We can't, just like we're not going to accept the new religion of Christianity, we're also not going to accept within Judaism using God or spirituality to decide the halachic process when we have certain parameters and certain rules. The main rule is achrei rabim lahatas, that we go after the majority rules. There are side rules of how we figure out what a majority is. Is it a majority of numbers, or is it a majority of greatness? And that's a subtle distinction. Is it just simply we take a straw poll of what most Jews do, how they observe? No. We go after a certain level of what would be rabbinic figures, with some exceptions. The idea of taking a straw poll and see what most Jews observe and don't observe applies to very limited circumstances, to when a particular type of rabbinic decree was made, and that at a certain later time they want to assess whether or not it became binding upon Jewish people based on whether or not the majority of Jews, or observant Jews at least, adopted that custom or not. But that's a specific circumstance. Generally speaking, the majority was a certain caliber of scholar that became part of the Sanhedrin, part of perhaps even more than the Sanhedrin, a learned elite class of scholars. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yeshua, and not listening to Abaskal. Now we're going to go. That's number one of the top 10. Now, guys, get ready to and women, get ready to go a lot deeper into number 2. Number 2 is based on Tosfos. Number 2 is, according to the majority of Jewish people, the debate between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai was in fact settled by a heavenly voice. And the question is, if there is this potential of Rabbi Yeshua's teaching of not paying heed to Abaskal, why was there a need for a heavenly voice to rule like Beis Hillel, and why do we in fact have, continue to feel that has some credence in the specific case of Beis Hillel versus Beis Shammai, as opposed to the case of Rabbi Elazar versus the sages, where Rabbi Elazar was roundly ignored. He died, unfortunately, in a state of basically being excommunicated by the rabbis for not bowing to their will in that case. So what's the difference between Beit Hillel and Beis Shammai? That we do accept the Baskal for the most part, with the exception of our Gemara's understanding of Rabbi Yeshua. It's not really clear that there could be, it's one opinion in Rabbi Yeshua. It's not necessarily what Rabbi Yeshua says, it's what he might say. But everybody else would tend to say, in the case of Beis Hillel, we follow Beis Hillel because of the Baskal. So the Tosfos here, on Nun Beis Amud Al 52a, says the following reason. He says, "V'yesh lomer dedavka hasam kamer de'ein mashgichim bebaskol dehabaskol haya keneged harov." It's specifically there in the case of the Tana Shalachnoi, the serpent-like oven, it's just an expression. You look there for the reason why it has that name, serpent. There, the majority was against Rabbi Elazar, and they were with Rabbi Yeshua. Now, so when there's a majority, there's a clear majority, and the Baskal is against the majority, we disregard the Baskal. Because the Torah says, Achrei Rabim Lahatos. It's a verse in the 23rd chapter of Shemos, of Exodus, that say we decide by a majority, as we were just talking about before. This is, again, number 2 of the top 10. But in the case of Beis Hillel versus Beis Shammai, at that point in history, Hillel was the majority. Okay? Now, so that's the answer. So In fact, Tosas would like to suggest that the Tana of our Gemara, that even though they're claiming to be Rabbi Yeshua, it's just it's an opinion of how to interpret Rabbi Yeshua. It's not necessarily what Rabbi Yeshua would say. And why the question now becomes, so since there was no need for a baskol, because the halacha would be like Beis Hillel, because we follow the majority, what use is the baskol anyway in the case of Beis Hillel versus Beis Shammai? And Tosas answers the following answer. He says that the students and the school of Shammai, Hayim Mechadid and Fei, they were sharper. So there would be a counter argument against the majority of Hillel that the majority only works when the two groups are equal in intellect and one group is a majority, then you follow the majority. But if one group is brighter, even if they're in the minority, they could hold out and say, your majority doesn't count as a majority because we're not equal in stature. So for example, if you took the psak of Moshe Feinstein on one side, and then you had the psak of I don't want to say names, but very fine poskim, and you had 3 poskim ruling one way, and Rav Moshe ruling the other way, and those are the only 4 people who ruled on the subject. Are you going to tell me that because the 3 is a majority against the 4, we should rule like the 3? We usually don't do that. We say these 3, they're very good people, but they're not Rav Moshe Feinstein. So in many instances, we would rule like Rav Moshe against those people. In fact, one of the pet peeves I have against, not against, but like some of these English halacha books is they'll tend to quote more strict opinions many times when there is a clear psak from Rav Moshe that's more lenient, and Rav Moshe, they'll say, well, he's one opinion, and there's other opinions as if they're equal. They're not equal. So, again, that was the claim of Beis Shammai's people at that time, is we're not equal. We know you're a majority of people, but there's a Yiddish saying, the olam is a goylem, which means the masses are golems. They're androids. Is that the word? They're robots, whatever. They're not to be trusted with important things. So that was the real debate. It wasn't settled just because there's a majority. So how does so then the question is, if there's really an open debate of who the law is like, then again, how could you trust the baskol? Because Torah lo b'shamayim. And that might be our Gemara, or our Gemara's claim of Rabbi Yeshua's opinion is, you're right, we don't look at the baskol, and the halacha had to be settled within the parameters of the halacha, had nothing to do with the baskol. And that's why the Tana of our Brisa had to say, I don't believe in the baskol, even in the case of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, but I did my homework. The halacha is like Beis Hillel, and that's it, either because of his logic is more sound. We follow Beis Hillel, but it's not because of the baskol. Okay, so let's go a little further. Let's go a little deeper. That's Tosfos here. Let's see some additional explanations. Ask for the music to be lowered here. My holy friend, you got to lower the music. I'm recording something live, making a lot lower. Please, thank you. Okay. So that is Tosfos. There's a few other Rishonim. There's one of the opinions of the Gaonim that we might be able to bring in over here. But before I do that, I just want to mention that there are other precedences where there were forgotten halachot that the Talmud mentions in the time of Yoshua, for example. And Yoshua did not want to restore them based on prophecy. Again, and this is to underscore the issues we have with prophecy. Okay. So the question I just asked before I got up for a second is, so how and why was the halacha decided like Beis Hillel if we don't really listen to the Bas Kol? It could be that the Bas Kol was just a way of saying the halacha is like Hillel. It already was decided like Hillel. There were just some holdouts. It's like, imagine lahavdil, if you have a war and one country wins and the other country signs a peace agreement, but there's some like guerrilla people in the jungle. They don't know that the war is over, so they continue to fight the fight. And it's like even their own country has to tell them, please stop fighting. The war's over. We lost. So perhaps the Bas Kol could be seen like for the holdouts in the house of Shammai who refused to really. The majority of the house of Shammai gave in. That's why many rabbis were called Shamuti. They were called Shammites. It doesn't mean that they continued to follow Shammai over Hillel. It means that they had agreed with Shammai about certain things at certain points of time, and then they retracted the view of Shammai, and they went with Hillel. But maybe there was some element or aspect of what they still had some attachment to Shammai. So perhaps what it means is that it was to try to get the remnants of the holdouts of the house of Shammai to come around and to agree with Hillel. But the halacha was already decided. But the question I had is, if they really were the Ramosha Feinsteins of the generation and the Hillels were the lower class level of poskim, so to speak, to compare it, so what is the answer? And the answer is that it was true that at some point in raw ability, the house of Shammai had greater ability. But the house of Hillel had an advantage that they listened to the argument of their people that they were arguing against, the school of Shammai, and they responded. And often the school of Shammai didn't engage enough and pay attention to what the exact opinion of Hillel is. And because of that, eventually the school of Hillel outweighed the school of Shammai, not just in numbers, but also in analytic ability. So really, the raw potential power of Shammai was eventually outweighed by the thorough response and patience, and that's kind of like the story of the tortoise and the hare. It could be that the tortoise is a lot slower than the hare, and you'd think the hare would win the race. But if the tortoise is ready to go the distance and has persistence, he'll win the race. If the rabbit, gets too assured of himself. So in a sense, lahavdal elef avdelos, that's what happened. The school of Shammai was too assured of themselves, and the house of Hillel eventually overtook them, not just in numbers, but also in greatness, or equal in greatness, and therefore the law is like Hillel, with or without the Bas Kol. But the Bas Kol might have helped settle a little thing. So that's the end of number 2. And there's a lot more to say on each of these things. There's other additional opinions. I have to limit it for time. Number 3. So the Gemara has a very long conversation about a contradiction when it comes to what goes first for Shammai. It seems, our Mishnah had said that when it comes to the Friday night Kiddush, right, or a holiday Kiddush, that according to Shammai, you should first sanctify the day, make what we call Kiddush, make a blessing on the sanctity of the Shabbos, and then you'd make the Hagafen. And there were reasons given for that. For example, the reason why you have the wine is only because you're making Kiddush. Also, there's another reason that's unwritten here, but the commentators talk about it, so that you can make the bracha on the wine without any interruption. The last bracha you'll make is Hagafen, and then you'll drink the wine. We don't follow that. We follow Hillel, which says you should make the Hagafen before the Kiddush. Because he says he gives two reasons. We already talked about the last stuff, so it's not really relevant, but he gives two reasons, and we follow that. Even though it's like a little strange, shouldn't we wait for the bracha of Hagafen right before? But no, we make it first because it's Tadar she'eno Tadar Tadar Kodem. One of the reasons is that it's something that's more frequently, the bracha on wine is more frequent than Kiddush, so you make it first. And another reason as well, that the reason why we're making Kiddush is because we have wine. Otherwise, we would just say it in shul. So comes a teaching that says that effectively, let's say by Havdalah, that we see that Shammai says you make the bracha on the wine after the Havdalah, which is, by the way, again, not what we do, but that's what's recorded here. And the Gemara has a whole conversation that basically it contradicts. Shammai contradicts himself. And it's a very intricate and very interesting conversation. But when the Gemara finally comes up with a beautiful answer, a very beautiful answer, it says it's not really a contradiction, is when you're bringing in Shabbos, according to Shammai, what brings in the Shabbos? What brings in the holiness of Shabbos? The Kiddush, the words of the Mikadesh HaShabbos, to sanctify the Shabbos in the Kiddush. So you want to say that first. You want to say that even before the Hagafen. When you say Havdalah, what is it that you want to do? What says goodbye to Shabbos? What ends Shabbos? Baruch HaMavli Ben Kodesh, the words of the Havdalah that separate between the holy and the profane. So when you're bringing it in, you want to bring it in as soon as possible. You want to bring it in a little earlier. When you're leaving, you want to hold on as much as possible and leave a little later. So the sooner we could bring in the Shabbos, the better. So we make the Kiddush before the Hagafen. The later we can leave the Shabbos, better. We hold out to the Havdalah till after the Hagafen. I find that so fascinating because Shammai seems like to be the epitome of halacha. Halachic principles are usually not about like kind of running to bring in Shabbos by 1 second, a few seconds, or holding on to Shabbos for another 10 seconds at the Kalbach Shul. Okay, would have been, if we would have followed Shammai, we would have held on to Shabbos for another 10 minutes. Yehuda Green's Havdalah, but we don't follow Shammai. So actually, we do follow Shammai in the Havdalah. We do follow Shammai, and Hillel and Shammai agree for Havdalah in terms of making Havdalah after the Hagafen. So why is this so important to me? Because later on in the history of Kabbalah, the main part of what many Jews celebrate today, especially in the less halachic movements, is Friday night, is the Kabbalah Shabbat. Kabbalah Shabbat is based on the Kabbalists of Tzfat going out to greet the Shabbos queen, going out into the field, and so on and so forth. So in halachic terminology, it's just a few seconds, but if you knew who Shammai was, those few seconds represented a universe. That represented an opening in a way to like really work on receiving the Shabbos, and really work on letting go of the Shabbos, not just letting it finish, but like holding on to it. And that's like one of the biggest foundations of the Kabbalah, whether it's in the Zohar, whether it's in the Ari, or Rav Shlomo Alkabetz, who's the author of the Chadodi. These are like key things. So even what I'm like so intrigued by is these are kind of preceding what we're now experiencing as some of the most beautiful parts of Shabbos, where you won't find very much a mention of Kabbalat Shabbat in the conventional sense of what we do today in the Talmud. You'll find a few little stories and this little thing here, but if you delve deeply into them, you may be pleasantly surprised. So that's number 3. Now we get to number 4, which is, do you need to make Birchat HaMazon, benching, on a cup of wine? Now, most people say, what do you mean? Like who? One person on his or her own? 3 people? 10 people? What are we talking about? So I remember when I was a student in the yeshiva in Oral Chanan, Rabbi Ezra Shochat said to me that he would personally pay for me to have wine, to be in charge of having wine or grape juice, and that every time we had a meal in yeshiva that we washed during the week, forget about Shabbos. I mean, Shabbos also presumably, but Shabbos I wasn't there so much for dinner. I was home. But for lunch and dinner, we'd often have a motzi, and we'd wash, and we'd bench, and we'd often have a zimun. And he said, you should be making zimun. He really felt that the zimun should happen over wine. He said, even if you do it yourself, there's an opinion that you should use wine. He felt that the better if you should. And I respected his learning, but I was like, to myself, I was thinking, like, there's just no way that the guys are going to like get into that. Like it's almost like I know what people do. The minhag has become, and let's discuss whether there's a yisod for it in halacha. The minhag has become that people generally don't go out of their way to get a kos for 3 people on a weekday lunch or dinner. They make a zimun and that's it. They do their abosai, Hishem, Hashem, and so on, but they're not going out of their way for a kos. And even sometimes 10 guys don't even bother. On Shabbos, then everybody goes out of their way. If there's definitely if there's 10, even if there's 3, if there's something special. Look, it's not like people won't do it during the week. They're just not makbid so much to do it. So what is this all based on? It's mostly based on the Gemara in Pesachim. I think it's a 105 or something. Not that I know it by heart. I don't. But I looked it up recently. So it's like 105 or around there. And the Gemara there says that we make the third kos on the Birchas HaMazon. The Gemara asks, does that mean that Birchas HaMazon requires a cup? And the Gemara says, no, it's a mitzvah. It doesn't prove that it requires a cup, but it is a good thing because it's a mitzvah to make Birchas HaMazon, and you do a mitzvah with a kos, even if it's not required. We try to connect all 4 of the cups to a mitzvah. And that Gemara has a parallel in our Gemara as well. The Gemara here says, in the middle of the page, B'savri Beis Shammai the Birchas HaMazon te'una kos. Does Beis Shammai hold that when you do the grace after meals it requires a cup? V'hatznan ba lehem yain la'achar HaMazon im ein sham ela oso kos. Beis Shammai omer mevarach alayan v'achar kach mevarach al HaMazon. There's a brisa that says the following: if wine came to them la'achar HaMazon. Now, la'achar HaMazon doesn't mean after the meal the way we have after the meal. It's the way they used to have. They used to drink before the meal, then they would have a meal, and then they wouldn't conclude the evening. They would have after dinner drinks. I think today the equivalent would be like dessert wines, things like that. So they would have these after dinner drinks. So it's not like they would bench and have a cup of wine. No, they'd have the main course, and then they would have maybe some maybe a little bit of extra food, some specific type of appetizers or dessert. I don't know what you call it, what we call dessert. and they'd have some alcohol, some wine after the main meal was served. So let's say it seems like it's only that cup, meaning you don't have 2 cups. Now, if you had 2 cups, you'd have the cup before the benching to enjoy during the dessert time, and then you'd make presumably another cup for the Brachot Hamazon. But in this case, you have 1 cup. So the Brisa says, Beis Shammai omer mevarach al hayan ve'achkach mevarach al hamazon. Beis Shammai says, enjoy the wine, before benching, and then you can make the benching. Now it doesn't say. It seems to indicate that there's only 1 cup. Well, it said there was only 1 cup. So that would mean that you drank the cup, presumably, and now you're making the Brachot Hamazon without any wine, which would seem to contradict our Gemara that seemed to imply that Beis Shammai holds you do need a cup for Brachot Hamazon. So, what does it mean? When you make the blessing in the dessert time, you're actually drinking it. The Gemara says, no, no, you make the bracha without drinking it. But that's really ridiculous. First of all, there's a practical reason, what's the point of make a bracha on something that you're not going to have? It doesn't do anything. But the Gemara asks it a little bit differently. The master said, when you make a bracha, you have to taste. You can't make a bracha now and then taste it in an hour from now or 20 minutes from now. No, you got to taste it now. So the Gemara answered, no, that he did taste from it. But the master said, when you taste from a cup of wine, you have a sip of the glass, then you can't use that for kiddush or for a mitzvah. So the Gemara says, instead of drinking it from the glass, you pour it into your hands. The commentator says it doesn't mean you have to literally pour it into your hand. You can pour it into another cup. But what about the master saying that you need to have a measurement of a revius? It has to be a few liquid ounces, let's say 3 ounces, let's say, or 4 ounces, depending on different shiurim, a little over 3 ounces. So the Gemara says, and he's by pouring some out and drinking it, even if it's not from the cup directly, you're lessening the amount that you need, the requirement of the revius. The Gemara answers, enough for shleit famous sure. It has more than a revius, so there's still a revius remaining. But the Gemara asks, but the Brisa said you only have 1 cup. That means 1, not 2. So the Gemara answers, trei loihava umechad nafish. It's not fully 2 reviusin, 2 cups worth, but it's more than 1 cup. So you can drink a little bit. The Gemara says, "V'hatani Reb Chia Beis Shammai omrim mevarach hayan v'shaseu." But Reb Chia taught that Beis Shammai says you make a bracha on the wine and you drink it, meaning entirely. And then only you make the grace after meals, presumably without any wine. So the Gemara says, so the truth is the Gemara eventually is forced to say that Brisa holds that you in effect do not have a requirement to make the Brachos Hamazon according to Beis Shammai on a kos. Our Mishnah, our Gemara indicates that Beis Shammai holds you do need a kos. So that means there's a debate there are 2 Tanaim, 2 teachers taught different opinions, both claiming to represent the school Shammai. That happens all the time. Now, what's interesting here is since it's only one of the 2 schools within Shammai, and Shammai is also not who we generally follow like the halacha, why is this even relevant to this conversation? The answer is that we know from other Gemaras that this question comes up not just when it's about Beis Shammai. Does Brachot Hamazon need a kos? It comes up like it came up in Psachim, and I believe it comes up at least in one more place. I didn't look it up, so maybe it comes up in more than 3 places, but 3 places that I believe I'm aware of. Here, Psachim, and one other place that I'm aware of. I think also in Brachos at some point, maybe earlier. But be that as it may, if there's a debate, what is the law? So the answer here is the Rif and the Rambam, and I believe the Ran, rule that you don't need a cup. Um, the Ran says that the Rif and the Rambam mean to say you should have a cup, it's nice to have a cup, but you don't need a cup. For some reason, some of the Nosakalim, some of the commentaries of the Rambam are very bothered by the Rambam, and they try to say he doesn't really mean that you don't need a cup. You do need a cup, unless you don't have a cup, or But on the other hand, some of the Ashkenazic poskim, like the Rosh, say you do need a cup. And so much so that you need a cup not only on Shabbos, but also during the week. Not only with 10 people or 3 people, but even with one person. So my Rosh Hashiva probably, he liked the Rosh a lot, because he was known as the Rosh, so he liked the Rosh. That's a pun. Maybe he liked the Rosh so much that he really wanted to bring back the custom to make Birchas Hamazon on a kos, even for one person. Interestingly enough, the Arizal is quoting as saying our minhag is not to make the Birchas Hamazon on a kos when it's only one person, but perhaps if somebody really wants to make it, they should just set the cup down and not hold it. So that indicates that it's not a regular kos of kos shel bracha. Okay, so that's a little bit about the Ari, and a little bit about the Rambam and the Rosh, and not that there are not a significant amount of other Rishonim, and the Beis Yosef, the Mechaber, and the Shulchan Aruch seems to bring down all these 3 opinions, that either you have to do it, you don't have to do it, or you should do it. And he doesn't really seem to really take a side. And some people, the Mishnah Brura says, I believe the Mishnah Brura says something to the effect that you definitely should try to do it. It shouldn't just be like, no, I don't want to, I'm not in the mood. And in other words, if you don't have it, you don't have it. Some of the stricter Rishonim that say you need it, say don't have a meal if you don't have wine. Even if you have to delay the meal and have it an hour past the regular time going to get wine. It must have been very hard for people. Even today it's hard to get wine for a lot of people. It was much harder then. So, okay, so that's a little bit about wine. Besides for the Rosh, it's the Tur and Tosfos. And that require the wine for Birchas Hamazon. Okay, great. So now we go to number 5. We mentioned in number 4, when reading number 4, that tamo pagmo, which means if you taste the wine, you affect that you can't make kiddush on a cup that you had a taste of the wine. So let's see. Let's see what the story is. With Tama Pagmo, you create like a blemish in it. Now, how do you undo the blemish? So it's interesting because in modern sensibility, once you tasted from something, it's more like you can't send it back. Let's say I I opened up a bottle of wine, poured the whole glass, the whole bottle into a glass. Had a large glass, took a sip of the glass, and I said, "Waiter, come here. This is, I love this wine, and this bottle just isn't right." The waiter is going to tell me, "Look, you bought the bottle. You should have tasted a little bit of it, and then to return the bottle after you tasted from a glass that had the entire bottle in it, there's nothing I can do with it. I can't help you, right?" So that's because our modern sensibilities tell us that once somebody tasted from the glass, it's got germs on it, and nobody else who isn't your spouse, is going to be interested in it. But besides for that, I don't know that they had the same sensibilities about germs. There was just something about, it's like, like I want my own cup of coffee. I don't want to take, it's like when you finish your coffee, I'll get the rest of your coffee. Thank you very much. I want my own cup of coffee. It was kind of like psychological, not just not just in terms of the fear of germs. Okay. So because it was psychological, there was a way to fix it, which is if you poured in more wine or more water, or more wine and more water, you somehow undid the fact that it was tasted from. So in fact, what you would do, if let's say, I noticed a lot of times I make Kiddush, and it's like I end up, even if I am not in the mood to have the whole cup of wine, I'm like, what am I going to do with it? I'm not going to put it back in the bottle, even if I'm the only one drinking from the bottle. But the truth is, let's say I wanted to put it back in the bottle because I didn't want to waste it, and I didn't want to drink it. In theory, what I could do is I'd pour some more wine from the bottle, paradoxically. That somehow undoes the pgam, the blemish, and then I could pour it back. So if you ever see somebody doing that, they're pouring good wine into not good wine. That makes it all good. Then they could pour it back and they could use it. I don't recommend people doing that with shared bottles, but if you're at home and you're the only one at home and you're going to be making the next thing with it, then in theory you could do it. Okay, so that's a little bit about Tama Pugmo and how to undo it if in your circumstances that is going to work for you. That's number 5. Number 6, let's do a little bit about Tumas Yadayim. Our Gemara says, continues with discussing different debates in the Mishnah. The 2 debates that primarily occupy us next is, should you wash your hands before they would have wine before Hamotzi? We call Kiddush, right? But also, by the way, it's not just Kiddush. In ancient times, we had this in an earlier shiur. The way they would do is they would first have appetizers, sometimes in a separate room before the formal dining room, and with the appetizers, at some point, they would take wine. And Beis Shammai says, at the point that you're going to take the wine, don't take the wine. First wash your hands, then take the wine. Beis Hillel says, don't wash your hands, take the wine, and when you're ready to have the bread, before you have the bread, then wash your hands, what we call Netilas Yadayim. And the Gemara discusses the back and forth between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about each practice. And it gets pretty interesting and complicated into the laws of Tumah and Tahara to really be able to break it down. The background for it is, let's say you have the laws of ritual purity in the time when they had the temple. You had like a corpse that was called the Avi Avot HaTumah. That's the grandfather of impurity. The person who came into contact with the corpse, so let's say touched the corpse, becomes the Avat Tumah. Then if they touch ochlim or kalim, food or vessels, that becomes a Vlad Hatuma, which means a descendant, or what we would call a Rishon, 1 degree removed from the Av. And then if that touched other food, so that would become a sheni. And then if that touched other food, it would become a shlishi only in certain rare circumstances, meaning it only becomes a shlishi or revi, not regular food, but only if shlishi for truma and revi for kudshim. They have to be a high level of sanctity for it to continue to convey tuma from one food to another. Otherwise, at a certain point, it doesn't transfer anymore in chulin, the realm of chulin. So I hope I'm getting that right. I'm not always. So here's the deal here. Hillel says, Hillel says, take the cup, pour the cup, mix the cup, drink the cup, and then do Netilas Yadayim. Because if you're going to wash your hands before, we're afraid Shema Yitma'u Mashkin Shubidai Mach Masakos. Maybe the liquid on your hands, if you didn't dry them well, will become tameh from the cup. And then they will in turn go back and transmit tumah to the hands. That's Hillel. Shammai, actually I'm doing it out of order. Shammai says, maybe if you don't wash, there's a fear that the liquid outside of the cup, for whatever reason, you try to get the liquid on the inside, but sometimes liquid pours on the outside, gets spills, or whatever it is. That will become tameh because of your hands. V'yasu v'yatamu esakos, and they will in turn transmit tuma to the cup. Now, what's interesting is that Rambam in the laws of tuma says that the yadayim do not make the kalim, don't make vessels tameh. That seems to be a very unique opinion. The other Rishonim, Rashi, and others say no. The whole idea here is that the Yadayim do make midrabbanans rabbinically. The rabbis made a series of decrees here. By the way, I forgot to mention that this is all rabbinic. These arguments are all rabbinic strictures in the laws of Tumah, very similar to what we learned earlier. Not earlier, actually, later in Shabbos, about the 18, many of the 18 things that Shammai's school overpowered Hillel's school have to do with these laws of Tumah and Tar related to this. So basically the question is, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they argue here, even though it doesn't seem that Beis Hillel rejects the very idea of this rabbinic stricture of the hands, because there's a very interesting thing, when the hands become tameh with liquid, it's like a double decree. There's a decree on the hands, there's a decree on liquid, and then it could affect even making the external, not the whole vessel, but just the external part of the vessel, tameh. But the Rambam, for whatever reason, paskins that that's not the case. And that's fascinating because what he's basically saying is that the Hillel doesn't have to disagree on every point to not agree with things that Shammai are saying. He's taking a broad understanding of how to kind of within the realm of Hillel to give him more leeway to interpret how he wants Hillel to work. This is just an interesting thing. It needs a little more conversation, but we need to move on to number 7. Number 7 is fascinating. Number 7 is the following. I got notes here, and of course, like a dum-dum that I am, I put my notes everywhere and nowhere. Okay, where's that note? I think here it is. Okay, here it is. Number 7. So, number 7 is a fascinating Ramah when it comes to when we wash our hands. Everybody knows we wash our hands before we make Kiddush. No, just kidding. We all know that we wash our hands before we make Hamotzi. I remember I was once a guest by a very chashuv Yid in California for Shabbos. And he had us all wash our hands before Kiddush. I'm not sure whether he himself washed after or not. He may have washed after. There'd be a reason why he'd wash after. Now, I was like, I already knew, I was a young rabbi, I already knew this Gemara. And I was like, the Gemara says that it's a machlokas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. We follow, everybody knows you follow Hillel. Why is this guy following Shammai? It turns out he wasn't crazy. He was a yekka. So I was like, okay, he's a yekka, fine. He has crazy minhagim. Turns out it's not such a crazy minhag. It turns out that it's a Ramah. It's really the mainstay of Ashkenazic practices. It's usually Ramah. Question is why did he say something that's keneged the Gemara? And what is that? It's our Gemara. It's here on Nun Beis. Let me see if I can find it for you. It's on Nun Beis Amud Beis. So let's take a look and see what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Davar Acher, Tekif L'Netilas Yadayim Suda. Okay, so what is that? What is that davar acher? Another point to explain Hillel in the brisa of why you would drink your wine or your kiddush before washing for bread is take of lentil sidaim suda. The washing should be immediate before the meal. The meal is the hamotzi. That's the meal. The Gemara says my davar acher. Why does it even have to say another point? I think the Gemara answers why it has to say that. But the main point is here is we follow Hillel. Hillel says very clearly you gotta wash not before Kiddush, but right before Hamotzi. So why does Ramah say something that seems to go like Shammai? Very strange Ramah. So let's see what my notes said. I wrote this yesterday. My memory is so bad I've got zero recollection of what I myself wrote. Okay. Here's what I wrote. Surprisingly, the Ramah in Orach Chaim and 271, Halacha Yud Beis, rules like Beis Shammai to wash before Kiddush. Also, see Psachim 106b. Okay, here's the answer. It seems like Rav, according to one opinion, in 106, end of 106, the beginning of 106b, sometimes washed before Kiddush. One way of reading the Gemara there is there's an argument about what Rav did. One of the rabbis said, "You guys, Rav died." It's an expression. Rav died, and you forgot what Rav did. Common expression, especially when it came to brachos. What did Rav do? Rav would wash his hands, and then he would, if he felt like making kiddush on wine, he'd make kiddush on wine, and then presumably eat the bread. And if he felt like making kiddush on the bread, he'd eat the bread. Again, there's variant ways of reading this, but that's some of the Rishonim read it like that. In other words, he sometimes washed before making kiddush on wine, and that was okay. Now, so the question is no longer, before we're questioning why did the Ramah say what the Ramah says? It's Rav. Okay. So we can't give the Ramah a hard time anymore. The question is, why would Rav do this? And so one answer that I think it's Rabbeinu Tam says in Tosos, Divrei Masel Zimnin, is that Shabbos is an exception, as it would, presumably Rav was talking about Shabbos, because Shabbos everything is so ready, so that even if you made Netilas Yadayim before you made Kiddush, the whole table is set. The wine is mixed. They used to mix water with the wine. Apparently, during the week they would also sometimes put in hot water. I don't know what that's about. I'll look it up later. They didn't mix anything hot in the wine. So even if they had to add a little bit of water, that's all it was. They were ready to go. So they'd make Kiddush and then go right into Hamotzi. So it wasn't really much of a hefsek. But other times there would be a bigger hefsek. So if you're just having a cocktail, let's say you're meeting friends, and you first sit at the bar, you have a drink, and then you sit down at your table. So then, imagine you make Netilas Yadayim, you sit down, you have a glass of wine, you have a conversation, and then you start, setting your table. That's a hefsek. That's going to be a tremendous hefsek. So that's one answer. That's Tosos's answer, Ben Tom's answer. Another answer, also in Tosos, is the thing about hot water. They would use hot water during the week. That's more complicated. They wouldn't use hot water to mix into the wine on Shabbos. That's an interesting thing we need to look into. Now, Rav Bruna, in the name of Rav, has the opposite opinion, which is what we follow, which is like that we wash our hands only after Kiddush. So, interestingly enough, Rav is a major person, So that would make sense why, if there's an opinion in Rav, why the Rama would paskin like that. The question only would become, why only the Yekas follow the Rama till today? The answer would be that the Yekas are very particular in their minhagim, and that was the minhag of the Rama. Even though he argues in the Shulchan Aruch and he argues on the Rov Rishonim, but he has what to be samechan. So anybody who has that custom can continue to have that custom, obviously. Question is, what if somebody's Ashkenaz and say, I want to re-embrace that custom? I think it's too late. Train has left the station. That's a little bit about number 7. Number 8 is, what bracha do we make first, besamim or eish? So, it's a good question, right? So the Gemara says, well, there's a machlokus actually between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, different opinions within Beis Shammai. So I'll say, let me read it to you, and I hope I'm not boring you, but it's a little bit technical. Gemara says the following. Rav Huna Bar Yehuda Ikla Lebei Rava. He visited Rava and he saw that Rava was saying Havdalah. First he said a blessing on the spices and then over the fire. So Rav Huna said to him, let's see, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel don't disagree with the blessing over fire. In other words, they both say that it should come before the besamim. As the Mishnah taught, first the fire, then the grace after meals. Actually, we don't do that. Then the spices, then the Havdalah. Or Beis Hillel says, Ner u'besamim mazon v'havdalah. First you do the Ner, then you do the besamim. So Rava responds, Zudiv Rabbi Meir. That's very nice, but that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. The Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Yehuda in the Brisa explains it differently. He says, Lo nachluku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai Beis Hillel do not disagree in the case of somebody who has a single cup of wine and is saying Havdalah and the Berachas Hamazon on it, that Al Hamazon should be Tchila, that the Berachas Hamazon should be first. Everybody agrees that we do it kind of like what we would do today. Well, we don't do it today, but if we did have to do that, we do that today. We do that, actually. Very much so. We actually use the same cup, even though we have more cups of wine, but that's a whole other story, which maybe we'll talk about for a second. We make benching on a cup of wine. We don't drink it because it's already after Shabbos, so it's a whole question. You're not supposed to drink then. But by the way, really, you should drink it because it's a mitzvah to drink it. And what about a shavar brachas? Should you drink it by shavar brachas? So many poskim, but Moshe says the bride and the groom should have like just a half, a lugma of a cheekful. That's it. That's the whole story between the two of them. And Havdalah is at the end. What's the argument? It's ma'or and besamim. Which one do you do first? On the flame or on the spices? Beis Shammai says first on the flame and then on the spices. And Beis Hillel says first on the spices and then on the flame. And Rabbi Yochanan says, No gu'am ke Beis Hillel aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, that the people act like Beis Hillel according to this opinion that we just said of Rabbi Yehuda, which is the custom we follow today. spices, flame, and then Havdalah. Okay, great. So that's what we do today. That's number 9. Number 8, and that's number 8. Number 9 is let's look a little bit more into some of this about Hillel and Shammai in this regard. So we'll see that they continue this argument about the bracha for Borei Me'orei Ha'esh is what we say. That follows the opinion of Hillel. But the opinion of Shammai is we should say Bora Ma'or, a singular. So that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, actually, Veshamei Shibara, that we say that he created in past tense. Beis Hillel says Bore. So that's one machlokas. The Gemara actually clarifies. Amar Rabba, Bebara kuli amalo pligi debara mashma. That bara, everybody agrees, means in past tense. Ki pligi bebore. The argument is bore. Beshame savi bore de asid lemivre. Bore implies in the future God will create, which is not right because God already created it, at fire in the beginning. Beis Hillel savi bore nami debra mashma. And Beis Hillel holds that Borei also means in the past. Now, by the way, why are we making a Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh? We'll talk a little bit about it. It's because God gave the gift of fire to Adam in the first month of Shabbos. He taught him how to make fire. So it was almost like a transmission of heaven. God's fire was given over to Adam. So Adam might have hit 2 rocks together and made fire, but it was like based on the divine principle of fire. So it had to be something that was created already. Not in the future, but in the past tense. And Beis Hillel says that also implies bara he created. The bara mashma implies that he created. And Rav Yosef says, asks the question, Yotzar v'ray choshech, Yotzar haram v'ray ruach, different scriptural texts, which shows us that bara is in the past. So that's a question on Shammai. So Elamar Rav Yosef, Bebara Obare Kule Amala Pligi Debara Masha. Nobody really disagrees. It seemed like they disagreed, but no, they didn't. Both agree that both of those words connotate creation in the past. Ki Pligi B'Ma'or U'Ma'ore. Rather, the disagreement is whether it's Ma'or, as Shammai says, illuminate, like illumination, like singular, or Ma'ore, plural, illuminations, lights. Beis Shammai sabri chad nahora ika benura. Beis Shammai says there's one light in a fire. Or Beis Hillel sabri tuva nahora ika benura. Beis Hillel says there are many. If you look at a fire, they're different. There's red, white, yellow, blue. There's all different colors in a fire. So the Vilna Gaon says the Metziah says there are different colors in a fire. So what is Shammai talking about? And the Vilna Gaon answers is that Shammai is referring to the original divine fire, that the divine fire is undifferentiated. Human fire, as we create it, has distinctions, but the source of fire in the divine realm is undifferentiated. Okay, so that is number 9. Okay, number 10 is amazing. So it's worth it all for hanging in there for number 10. Number 10 is amazing, amazing, amazing. So Gemara says that if the fire was used by a non-Jew on Shabbos, a Jew cannot make Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh on it. Very strange. Okay. Whatever, the rabbis say whatever they want, but what's the reason? So comes Rashi, it's the last Rashi on the page, and says something very perplexing, very powerful, very beautiful. And here's what Rashi says: Mishum delo Shabbos. That's the Gemara. Different Masa Mishum delo Shabbos because it didn't rest. Mimeleches aver, that the non-Jew, by using fire on Shabbos, did forbidden labor on Shabbos. Aver, like a sinful labor. She'ovid kochavim osa malacha la'ora, that the idol worshiper does work with its light. V'tanya l'kaman or shelo Shabbos ein mevarchan alav. We learned that, we're going to learn soon, next page, that a light that didn't rest, you cannot make the blessing on. Hol v'nevda ba'aver, since a sin took place. All the great rabbis say, what sin took place? And the brisker answer is, it's not that the person sinned, because a non-Jew shouldn't keep Shabbos. It's that the fire itself, the object itself, it itself was affected somehow, that it did whatever. That's a cute pshatel. It's not real pshat. I mean, Elu ve'elu divrei Chaim, it's all the word of the living God. It is a pshat. And it works for maybe other Rishonim. But for Rashi, there's a much simpler pshat, much more powerful. That is the following. If you look in the obvious question is, Ovid Chol Mazolos, there's no Aver, it's other Aver, the Akim Sheshabas is whatever. So, but if you look in Rashi, in Yevamos, Mem Chesam Ad Beis, we just learned it a few weeks ago in the Daf Yomi, that'll give you the answer. Rashi says in Divrei Masal Ger Tosha, this is what Rashi says, that a Noachite, somebody accepts what we call the Noachite laws. Shekibel alav shelo la'avod avodas kachavim. This is the Rashi in Yevamot. This non-Jew who accepts upon himself not to be an idol worshiper, that's part of the 7 Noachite laws, but continues to eat non-kosher, because it's not one of the Noachite laws. V'zira akasuv ala Shabbos. The Torah tells this person in regards to observing the Shabbos, warns them regarding the Shabbos. A person who violates the Shabbos, even a non-Jew who violates the Shabbos, is like an idol worshiper. What is Rashi talking about? Tosfos right away asks a question. What is going on? First of all, according to Rashi, there's many more than Sheva Mitzvahs. Also, we know Akim Sheshabas. The obvious answer is that Akum Sheshavas Chai Misa, not because of Shabbos, because he's an Ovigachav Mazalos. It's just that it's Shabbos. The reason why somebody who's Mekabel, the mitzvah of not worshiping idols, needs to keep Shabbos, even a non-Jew, is Shabbos is Eidos, is the witness of God creating the world. If you believe God created the world, you keep Shabbos, Jew and non-Jew. According to Rashi, very controversial position. I never saw anybody running around asking non-Jews to keep the Shabbos, except for Rashi. Rashi's a serious person. I'm not saying that we follow in the halacha. We don't, but it's something interesting to think about. Since Shabbos is an edus on the Creator, it's not just for Jews. It's for anybody who believes in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for anyone. That's what Rashi is saying. Rashi is saying that the Ovicham Azalos has potential not just to become a Jew. It doesn't have to become a Jew. It just has to be a Ger Toshav, a Noachite, and believe in one God, not in Avodah Zarah, and that includes Shabbos. That's a huge chiddush. But it's not my chiddush, it's Rashi's chiddush, and Rashi says it very clearly in Yevamos. Thank you for listening.